it's my lot today to continue the long tradition, and my subject's going to be value of the whale, or how to value a whale. I'd like to start off by thanking everyone for choosing to come to my lecture instead of going with the outing club, as should be. For the apparently 4 people who thought the outing club was going to be more interesting than my lecture, to you I say, the answer to the human ecology quiz at the end of week 10, which counts for 90% of your grade, the answer is 3. And don't tell anyone else.
Is this not the outing club?
This is not the outing club, Don. You need to go down the road. You're meeting at the Whale Skull. Okay, so where have we come from so far? So we've got a bunch of people that have given really amazing lectures, and I tell you the truth, I'm a little bit daunted by this. We have John, who came to us, I think, as a nun. This is the only time I'm ever going to get to call John a nun. But John was clearly being a nun and telling you to spend the day, in the words of Dillard, and the appreciation of intense observation, and then the recording of that intense observation through the process of natural history. Then we have Catherine, again talking about art as a way of knowing, also talking to us a little bit about the sublime. Then we have Rich Borden, who gave us a history of the college, talked about the use of having context about this place to help us study in the way we want to, a little bit about internal and external psychology. And then we have Darren, who's talking about craftsmanship, apprenticeship, the value of sort of kinesthetic type activities. And also Darren dared to give us part of the equation of what it is to be human. And then we had Don Cass. And I showed Don to corroborate this. If you Google Don Cass COA image, this is what comes up. So Don is telling us to question authority, and also, that what does it all matter anyway? Okay, it's probably none of it's real. What is reality in that sense? Just in case you think Don has exclusive rights to fantastical characters, that's actually me, and this was done by a COA student who loved me very much, and decided that he loved me so much he was going to put this on every desktop computer in the computer lab. So apparently I have the, this was back in the 2000s, so apparently I have the corner on being a hobbit. I've actually thought about the faculty as a band of hobbits, actually. I think it's kind of appropriate. We all have hairy toes. Even Catherine has hairy toes. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to be talking to you about how to value things. And honestly, I would encourage you to take out the word whale from this and just put in anything it is that you love, anything that you value. And I want you to think a little bit about how you approach the reason why you value that thing. Okay? And my argument ultimately would be that the choice to value something is deeply personal. Okay? And, whales are an interesting example of this because, on the face of it, we've got these laws and we've got this culture of whale worship, but ultimately it's your decision as a human, part of being human, to choose what to value, okay? So I'm hopefully going to tie in all these previous people in that to value something is intensely human. Thank you, Darren. It's based on contextual experience. It's highly personal. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, John. It is aesthetic in nature. Thank you, Catherine. But ultimately, it's your decision. Oh, yeah, and Don. Influenced by culture. Don talked a lot about being influenced by culture, and so a lot of things you believe actually might not be true. They just happen to be sort of culturally forced upon you. So, save the whales. Why? Why should you save the whales? To collect the whole set? Right? Well, it's because they're intelligent. Are they? Oh, no, it's because they're endangered. Really? So these are sort of the kinds of questions I'm going to be talking about. And I have to say, going after Don Cass is a very, very difficult act to follow. I don't have any models or magnets or 5-foot iron poles to pass around. I did bring a couple of props, though, to sort of compare me to him. First of all, I have a harpoon. This is a half-scale harpoon with what they call the traditional toggle head. This pierces the animal, goes underneath the blubber, and then the toggle rotates and it catches against the blubber so it won't come out. So we can pass this around. Here, catch. And also, because one of your readings talked about whale testicles, I did indeed bring a sample of whale testicle in here. Delicious. It's an Iceland delicacy. So if you'll forgive me for a second, like Don, I did bring ball and stick. Okay, here are the papers you read. It is my understanding that people enjoyed these papers, that, to use an expression Davis and I talked about, rather than the papers being dry, they were fairly wet, and they were fairly easy to engage with. I'm glad about that. I hope some of the papers shocked you. I hope some of the papers pissed you off. And I hope they caused you to think about, well, what would I do in those positions? And, what is my set of values that I would apply in those particular situations? So these are the 4 that we talked about. We have a paper by Barry Lopez, one by Arne Calland, who is an anthropologist. We had the one by Susan Ackerman. And then also a paper, for those of you who may not have realized, Steve Katona is actually the former Darren Collins. Okay? So he was the old president of the college, and he has since retired and moved on to greener pastures. Yes, Darren, there is hope. How can we value? There's all kinds of different ways to value whales out there. The first one is to value whales in the same sentence as crystals. And there is, this sort of new agey kind of, oh, wow, look. Whales are cool. They communicate to spaceships through rainbows and crystals. Yeah. And if we don't save the humpback whales, then one day an alien probe will come down and destroy our entire planet, unless we happen to have a spaceship that can slingshot back in time, back to the 20th century, get the last 2 humpback whales of the world, put them in a tank made of transparent perspex aluminum, and then transport them via the Klingon ship back to the 2500s, and finally save the world because they can sing to the spaceship and everything will be okay. I'm a complete trekker. I'm not a Trekkie, I'm a trekker. There's a difference. If you don't know, then you're clearly a Trekkie. I want this plate. But there's all kinds of pop culture surrounding these whales, right? So there's some films here that you probably have seen. Although Free Willy is interesting in itself because it actually has an element of truth to it. Not whale jumping over boy, but there was a real Willy, and his name was Keiko. And Warner Brothers, as a result of this film, actually tried to go through the motions of freeing this whale, and they failed miserably. And then there's Orca. Who's seen Orca? Oh my goodness, you guys have got some education to go on. Okay, Orca is the original Jaws. Okay, it's about a fisherman in Newfoundland who kills a pregnant orca, and as he's hauling the orca up on his deck by the tail, oh, the indignity of it, the final indignity when he slices open the belly, a stillborn calf drops out, and then you look off in the distance, and there's Daddy Orca looking, spy-hopping at the fisherman, and you see his eye turn red. And then the rest of the film is about this orca chasing Richard Harris around Newfoundland, and finally eats him on an iceberg. Oh, I'm sorry, spoiler alert. Sorry. Yeah. But if we take art a little bit more seriously, John talked to you a lot about, the history of natural history, and actually John's got a wicked good book out on the history of natural history. Did you put Gesner in your book, John, at all? Yeah, okay. So Conrad Gesner, and John and I may differ in our opinions a little bit. He really looked at Pliny and Aristotle, who came, of course, way, way before, and he tried to create a bestiarium of all the organisms on this planet. And this is the page devoted to whales. They've obviously got a few things wrong. So, for example, the blowholes are at the end of stalks. This animal has erupting teeth from the lower jaw, even though it's the size of a baleen whale. Each of these panels tells a story. This is the story of how they might use a whale, strip the blubber from the whale. That's primarily what whaling was about early on. It was about getting blubber from the animal and rendering that down to oil, which was, before we had discovered petroleum, a source of fuel. And they're putting it in barrels here. Again, notice the fishtail. In this panel tells us sort of the marine equivalent, the maritime equivalent of an urban myth, where sailors who were cold wanted to light a fire. And of course, the number one thing you should never do on a ship is light a fire. So the captain told them to go on an island and light the fire on the island. Well, it turned out the island was a whale. The whale was that big. So this is a reference to how big these whales are. And then this last one, a couple of brethren whales are really upset at what happened to their conspecific up here. And so in order to appease the animals, they're throwing the barrels of oil back to them, which is sort of like too little, too late. There you go. We can then also look at the possibility of science. Okay, we value whales through science. We do all kinds of investigation. This is a tagging experiment where they're going to dump a tag onto the back of an animal. It's non-invasive. It works on suction cups, and it's going to drop off after a certain amount of time, emit a little VHF blip. You go pick it up, and you gather all the data that tag has collected. This fella here is really the beginning of where most of that happened. He's one of the grandfathers of modern whale science, and he's mentioned in one of your chapters. This is Roger Payne. Okay? Roger Payne was like a god to me growing up. There were two people I wanted to be when I was growing up. One of them was Roger Payne, and the other one was Steve Katona. And at the time, although he doesn't have it here, both of them had long, bushy beards. So it was easy to sort of mistake the two. And they are part of a crew that I refer to as the silverbacks of whale biology. And I so wanted to be these guys. Roger Payne is responsible, not discovering, but encountering whale song and writing about it for the first time. And he wrote about that at a time which was really, really important politically on this planet, in the early 1970s, late 1960s, a time when people were looking for ways to improve how we behave to each other, how we behave to the planet during the environmental movement. And one might say that Roger was actually probably one of the most important people responsible for a very pivotal protection act called the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So there's Roger. And when you get a tag back like this, it's amazing how the technology is improving now, and we get awesome information like this. One of the challenges of studying whales underwater is that we are so supremely not adapted to work underwater, right? So how do we go with the whale? Well, we send electronic technology to follow that whale. And this tag is showing us the track of that animal. So, whereas you go on a whale watch, you see a whale blow here and a whale blow here, and you assume it does that. No, actually, it does all kinds of weird sort of squiggly things. And there's reasons for all of that. So this is incredibly useful data. And to tell you the truth, I think within whale science ourselves now, we're getting to a point where we almost have too much data, and we're not quite sure how to manage it all. So there's our whale returning to the surface for another blow. Remember, these guys are snorkelers, just like you or me. They don't have gills or anything like that. They're breath-holding with their lungs. And of course, we're finding more and more applications of human technology to apply to whales to try and understand what's going on. So for example, this is an MRI, a three-dimensional MRI of the skull of a bottlenose dolphin compared on the bottom to a gray fox, showing the similarities in bone structure, yet obviously foxes and dolphins look quite different. So this is my cue to tell you that don't forget marine mammals are mammals, just like you guys. They have essentially exactly the same structures on board as you and I do. Okay, they've just been modified or adapted through actually a relatively short piece of evolutionary history, about 60 million years. So one can accept that we might feel a bit of kinship to these guys because they're not so far away from us biologically. Okay? There's whale watching. Okay? And there's examples of very good whale watching and very bad whale watching. Although it sounds like sycophancy, I'd have to say that the Bar Harbor Whale Watch actually does a pretty good job of whale watching, as does our own skipper, Toby Stevenson. Whenever he's going out on the Osprey and there's room and you want to go out with him during the summer, you should go. Because if he sees a whale, he's stopping. And he's really good at working around the animals. So that's an example of a good whale watch. Example of a bad whale watch. I'm on a boat. I'm watching all these people looking at the whale, and that should be enough, but it's not sticking up its tail. Oh no, we want it to stick up its tail. Look, it's a whale. It's 45 foot long. It's 30,000 pounds. It's just like you, only bigger and heavier and fatter and smellier. But I want it to wave its tail. Okay, so the captain says, okay, we've got to end the whale watch now. So everyone wave goodbye to the whale. So everyone starts to wave goodbye to the whale, and the captain goes, bye! Bangs on the hull, and the whale goes, whoa! And sticks his tail up, and boom. Oh, look, it's waving to us. Yeah, you're stressed out, aren't you? Bye. So, there's good examples and bad examples. Whale watching is a really interesting thing to think about because, for a brief slice of time, you are in the presence of these animals. Some scientists have argued that during that time, the whale is captive, especially if you have many boats watching the same animal. And so it could be actually a fairly stressful thing, but it's very, very hard to prove that the animal is stressed. However, later on I'm going to talk about captivity, and this is at one end of that captivity scale, the possibility that we might behave inappropriately around these animals. This is another extreme of whale ecotourism. There's places in Tonga now where you can reliably go out and snorkel with whales. People feel differently about this. This is kind of on the scale also of gray whale petting, which I too have experienced. I'll tell you about that a little bit later on. And it allows you to have incredibly close, intimate contact with the animal. This is still a wild animal, okay? It's still wild, and perhaps we are teaching it or showing it things that it shouldn't get used to, it should not habituate to. And then there's Hero, Darren's Hero, who makes wonderful, wonderful sushi. Look carefully at that sushi. That's actually whale meat. It looks delicious. I could tell you it tastes disgusting. I've actually eaten whale meat, and it has a very fishy, sort of livery texture to it. And my experience of eating whale meat was, the first bite was, oh, that's what whale tastes like. The second bite was, oh my God, if I have another bite, I'm going to throw up. And my third bite was, throwing up. You have to have whale apparently cooked by a good Norwegian. Norwegians apparently are very good at cooking whale. And I did, and I still thought it was absolutely disgusting. But this looks amazing, okay? Where does this meat come from? It comes from a whale fishery. Notice the term, fishery, okay? We still treat whales with the same management methods that we use to manage fish. Fish are fish, whales are mammals. This is not appropriate, okay? So this is at the exploitative end, and I'll talk more about whale hunting later on as well. And then finally, back for Catherine, a little bit of sort of cultural artistry, and I'm sorry this image is a little bit mapped, I couldn't get anything clearer. This is wonderful Maori art. Many Aboriginal nations have all kinds of really interesting whale mythology. You guys may have seen the film Whale Rider. It's essentially a true story. It's not deviated too much from the truth. And the Maori have this amazing tradition of whales in their history and culture, even to the point that they believe some of the original migrations from Indonesia down to Australia and New Zealand was done on the back of whales. And that's the other end of Aboriginal culture. There are some Aboriginal cultures that still kill whales and eat them for sustenance. So this is a tribe, again, from Indonesia. They've just killed a sperm whale. It's not a particularly pleasant image to look at. The actual act of doing it is incredibly impressive, and if nothing else, it takes testicles, right? Because these guys will jump off their boat and use the weight of their body to plant the harpoon into the animal. This is an animal that is 35, 40 foot long, way, way heavier than you, and that's what they do. I'm just astonished at how brave these people must be. For the most part, Aboriginal taking of whales is not really frowned upon. Oh, it's good, it's fine. Let them do that, right? Because it's part of their culture. Well, why isn't it part of the Japanese culture to whale? They've been doing it for a long time too. They've been doing it for 200, 300 years. How long do you have to do it before it's not culture, right? Arne Calland talked about the super whale. And while I disagree with a lot of what Calland is eventually trying to move towards, what I didn't give you from his reading was the introduction where he said, hey, I'm Norwegian. I enjoy eating whale. I'm pro-whaling. Get over it. Okay? And so essentially the whole book is a very pro-whaling treatise. And perhaps you picked it up in the chapter when you were reading that. Yeah? He talks about this concept of the super whale. The idea is that we put this idea of a whale on a pedestal, and it has all these properties. It's the largest, it's the heaviest, it's the most smart, it has the largest brain, it is the most vocal, etc., etc., etc. In fact, that's an amalgamation of many different species within the whales. Yeah, the whale that we worship doesn't really exist. It's a conglomeration of many different species of animal. Sure, there's some really cool things going on inside of that. And there are particular traits that I have learned to observe with people that I work with. One of the things I do is I work a lot with tourists. And I observe how they react to whales, okay? And these are some of the things they commonly tie into. They go, oh, look, it's a mother and its baby. Oh, look, it's caring for the baby. Look how it's doing that. Yeah, it's doing that. Yeah, absolutely. There are plenty of other examples of parental care in the world. You don't need to be a whale to do that, okay? But maybe that's a way that we identify with whales because we obviously care for our young as well. There's this scale in animal behavior between what we call precocial and altricial. Precocial is, right, see ya, bye, okay? Only a couple of days and you're out the nest. Versus altricial, God, are you still here? You're 20 years old. Get out. No. So there's a scale there, right? And whale parental care is classified as altricial, just like our parental care is classified as well. So maybe there's a link there. They are amazingly good at interrogating their environment. They have a little bit of help that we don't have. They have some species of dolphin have echolocation, sonar ability, that we still can't match, actually, with military technology. Still not quite as good. This sonar is so good that if I were a dolphin back here and I was looking across at the entrance to the downstairs of the library over there, I could detect a wire that was less than 1/2 mil thick. Okay, that's how good it is. They are really, really good at sensing these things. If you go in the water with a dolphin, they'll click on you. They can tell you how fat you are. I don't need any help there. They can tell you whether or not you're pregnant. Not likely. Although maybe. They can tell you how good you are to eat based on the fat composition of your body. Really an amazing interrogative tool. And we don't have that. We don't have sonar. Although, interestingly, blind people sometimes acquire, in the absence of vision, they acquire an ability to use sound to interrogate their environment, which, strictly speaking, is sort of sonar-ish. So maybe we just need to all go blind. Sociality. Okay, they're very social creatures. Sometimes the sociality causes them to die alongside a fellow member that might be sick on a beach. So that drive for sociality is obviously very high. Or maybe, at least get them on the same beach together and then they realize they've made a mistake, but it's too late and they can't get away. And then, of course, there's this big one, intelligence and sentience. Whales sing. They must be intelligent. Birds sing. Do we call birds intelligent? Is that robin, that little wren over there? Do we think that's a sentient being because of that? That said, there are some things. So Arne Calland's argument is saying that there's nothing particularly special about whales. That said, we do have some new evidence in that Calland has not been using that I just want to quickly bring up. First of all, dolphins apparently are self-aware. They recognize their image in a mirror. Secondly, they are also capable of what we call cultural transmission, so the passage down of behavioral rules through some kind of learning tradition. And also, it turns out whales are might be very, very, very old in terms of their individual longevity. So just to talk quickly about those examples. So this is a dolphin absolutely bedazzled by his... I won't say bedazzled. That was very anthropomorphic of me. He's clearly curious about his image. And only a few animals can do this. There's a few monkeys. Interestingly, I think the last time I checked, maybe not gorillas or chimps. Or no, I think chimps can. And actually, there's one example of an Asian elephant that could recognize his image. But this is not a common ability in animals. Yeah, okay. I'm now going to show you a clip from a National Geographic. If I had any choice, I would not play you the soundtrack. But I want to play you the soundtrack because, in part, it helps you understand how sometimes the media can impose false values on something and be the guilty party in trying to portray misinformation. So let's go ahead and play this.
Welcome to the coast of Argentina. We're about to witness the most primal drama in the natural world. Crafty predator versus vulnerable prey. Only this drama has a big surprise ending. Right now, these adorable sea lion pups are protected by a reef that looms up during low tide. When the tide rises, Act 1 of our drama begins. The bent fin belongs to Big Mel, a 20-year-old killer whale that's been hunting this beach for 17 years. The jagged fin belongs to his 30-year-old brother, Bernard. As the sea lion pups splash happily in the water, they're revealing their location to the finely tuned sonar receptors of the whales. Like a dim-witted teenager in a bad horror flick, this oblivious sea lion pup frolics in clear view of a hungry predator and becomes his next meal.
All right, that's quite enough of that. So we have documented acquisition of this behavior in calves. So mothers and fathers teaching calves how to do this and actually acting on standby to rescue a calf if it screws up. There's documentation of a mother breaching deliberately near shore to create a wave that would then wash a stranded calf back into the water. So this is pretty neat stuff. And actually, just FYI, that shot was taken just around the corner in the next bay around from where Moon by Whale Light was written. Okay, just around the corner from there on the Peninsula Valdez in Argentina. I'll tell a quick story about this guy. So this is an Inuit hunt for the bowhead whale. The bowhead whale is an endangered whale, but it's felt that the Inuit take so few animals that it's a sustainable hunt. They only take them maybe 5 or 10 a year. And this particular hunt was attended by an officer of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And so he was actually physically present when, as they cut through the whale, they discovered a broken off old harpoon, which meant that this whale had survived a previous attempt at being killed. When they dated the harpoon was 150 years old. Oh, well, it must have been a 150-year-old harpoon. It can't be a 150-year-old whale, right? Okay? It's happened 3 times since, and each time the age of the whale has gone up. 150, 180, 190, 210. Okay? So these animals might live extremely long lives. And that makes sense mathematically. Bigger animals tend to live longer. So if you actually plot the points on a graph, it makes sense that whales are up there somewhere. So by giving these animals this sort of ancient nature, does that change the way you're going to value them? Does it change your mind about this whale, that it was alive during the time of Napoleon Bonaparte? So, do all these traits in sum put whales above everything else? In some ways, yes. Is this fair? No. Doesn't stop it from happening, though. That's where this term charismatic megavertebrate comes from. Okay? And when I use that term, I don't just mean cetaceans. In general, any marine mammal gets that tag, charismatic megavertebrate. It could be a seal, it could be a manatee, it could be a polar bear. These are all examples of marine mammals. But whales seem to particularly engage us as charismatic for some reason. Let me talk to you a little bit about the paradox of marine mammal rescue. I know we have one person in the audience at least who wants to become a marine mammal rescue person, and I don't want to put that person off, but let's just talk about that. Look at the seal, isn't it cute? Oh, look, the little stethoscope. Yeah, nice. Little tiny heartbeat. Whales have been stranding for a very, very long time. Okay? Pretty much as long as far back as we can document it, whales have been stranding. This is a very famous painting. Do you know much about this, Catherine? I think this is based out of Holland. Yeah? And it's a sperm whale. It's a cartoonized, caricatured sperm whale. It's not particularly accurate. It's clearly very male. And actually, the original for this painting is in the New Bedford Whaling Museum. And I've seen versions of this painting where someone has gone in and clearly sort of redacted the penis because we're not supposed to look at those kinds of things. Your reading a presentation of whales was about one of many, many strandings that have happened on the US coast. It was perhaps, one might argue, a pivotal event because as you probably read, and what you probably got the feel for was that no one knew what the hell they were doing at that event, right? Who's going to respond to this? Oh, the police. No, the scientists. Let's get the scientists. Oh, the scientists don't know anything. They don't know anything. Well, we should do something. The public, right? There's this confusion going on. No one really knows how to do anything. And different people are all bringing different values to that particular situation. You know, the scientist is all about data. I need data, right? But scientists are human too, and perhaps they're compassionate. You know, the public are extremely compassionate. They just want the animals to die in peace. There's nothing peaceful about lying on your side and having your blowhole stuffed with sand, right? How do you put these animals down? We still, in 2015, have no good way to put down an animal quickly. Actually, that's not true. We do. We do have a way. It's called a missile. But that would look really, really bad. So we don't do that, right? We don't use explosives on whales. Actually, there's a very famous Barry Norman film out there on YouTube about exploding whales. Worth YouTubing if you can find it. A lot about what we do in stranding has nothing to do with the animal. It has to do with making us feel better about a situation, okay? It's about us responding so the public feel better. Oh, thank God, you're here. We can do something about this animal now. Yes, ma'am, we'll take this seal from you, and we'll take it around here, and then we'll just euthanize it quietly while you're not watching, right? It's about feeling better about doing something, because ultimately, humans are good beings, right? I mean, most of us are pretty compassionate. We don't like to see suffering. What I found really interesting about that article was how the scientists were really denigrated, right? The group of people that I would most expect to be the experts in that situation, no one liked them there. And they were really criticized for their role in this event. And to be fair, back at that time, we didn't know what we were doing. Stranding science has come a long way since then. And in fact, we now have a stranding response network, in part inspired by events like this where we felt so helpless. When you have a whale this large, there's very little you can do. You're not managing the animal at all. You're managing the people around the animal and their attitudes, okay? The Stranding Response Program, the mandate for that comes from a pivotal act called the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which was the act that I was mentioning earlier on that Roger Payne was probably one of the instrumental people in starting. Another event that happened around that time was the whole dolphin-tuna conflict. Dolphins getting caught up in tuna nets and all the bloody images that came out of that. This Marine Mammal Protection Act is possibly one of the most effective, well, I won't say effective, probably one of the most strict conservation laws that we have in the world about any particular animal. It's extraordinary how powerful it is. I mean, this thing can shut down fisheries. It hasn't yet, but it could. It could do that. It has the mechanism inside of that. It's been around since 1972. It's just celebrated an anniversary. And part of the reauthorization of this act back in 1991 was, "Thou shalt be a Stranding Response Network program," of which COA is a part. Okay, and if you're interested in getting involved, you should go talk to the people up at Allied Whale, go talk to my colleague Rosie Seaton, and she'll sign you up, and you can get involved in that. Okay? But why do we do that? Very interestingly, the MMPA is very clear about why we respond to whales. We don't do it out of compassion. We do it because it's a source of data. That's how we value these animals, from that point of view. It's ironic because most of us in the business are there for compassion. We don't like seeing whales suffering. But we get to do it legally because we require the data that can come from that animal. They'll help us understand that animal more. Ironically enough, why do we want that data? Well, there used to be a time when we used to kill these animals for meat. The more we know about these animals, the more we'll be able to fish them sustainably. There's that word again, fish, right? Which could happen in the near future. Just to prove to you that I do look like a hobbit when I was younger, this is me. This is a good example of there's not much you can do. This is a blue whale, a baby blue whale, about 50 foot long, trapped in Newfoundland, beached on Newfoundland, and we're in the business of, go back. We're in the business of trying to convince it that it doesn't want to be on the beach. So my tool at the time was a large oar. So a very scientific process. So this is the blowhole of the animal. I won't show you all of this. And this is a silent movie because it's footage from CBC before they treated it for the news. There's me. That's another silverback. His name's John Leon, a very good friend of Steve Katona. And here we are trying to tow, what is probably a 60-ton animal out of the bay. I have to tell you, being this close to an animal that big, that could kill me in a heartbeat, is awe-inspiring. And I'm going to admit it. Absolutely. Could I look at this objectively? No. I was human. I treated this event completely subjectively. There was this strange moment when this animal was being levered by my oar, and I was trying to push it further and further down the beach so it would point out from the beach, and I was pushing, and I was pushing, and I was pissed off. I'd been doing this for like 6 hours, and I was pushing, and my oar snapped, and the animal started coming back towards me, so I stuck my foot in the way. Really? So I came home that night, and I told my wife, and she said, "You did what?" What? Right? They inspire you to do really stupid things, right? Really stupid things. And actually, you know what? The whale stopped. I'm still here. There's my leg. It's fine. It can go to real extremes. I suspect that most of you probably weren't born when this happened. But back in the 90s, yeah, right? We were still visions in our mum and dad's eyes, yes? Okay. Back in the 1990s, we had 3 gray whales strand in Alaska, in Barrows, Alaska. I think they just made a movie of it, actually, right? These gray whales are not endangered. They're trapped in an ice hole. This happens every single frickin' year. They always do this. They wait too long. The ice comes in. They need a breathing hole, so they get stuck in this one ice hole. What was different about this time was there was a reporter there. And although the internet had not yet been invented, Al Gore wasn't around yet, he made that story go viral. As a result of that, $7 million was spent on 3 gray whales, non-endangered gray whales, to make us feel better about that situation. They even wanted to get the Navy and the Coast Guard to come in and icebreak away to the ice hole. In the end, Mother Nature did its thing, and we believe the whales got out. Happened to me a couple of years later. It was kind of ironic. It happened in this small village of Brownsdale in Newfoundland. And hey, we got this ice-entrapped humpback whale. What are we going to do about it? And we went to it day after day after day. There was nothing we could do except watch the whale, monitor the crowds, try and help the crying children who were really, really upset about what was going on. Is Rosie here? I think Rosie, did you go to that? Did you go to the brown stairwell? Okay. Rosie was with me in Newfoundland for a little bit. We had people coming up to us going, "You've got to do something about that whale." Well, I can't, I'm sorry. But it's suffering. But there's nothing I can do. We have to wait for Mother Nature to do its thing, right? Look at these children crying. What are you going to do about that? Well, you know, it's National Geographic. This happens, right? You know, this is a perfectly normal thing. This is what Darwin does. Okay, it's natural selection in action. You've got to save it and return those bad genes back to the gene pool? Yeah, of course you do. Okay. So again, it was a waiting game. One day I came back and I had this gentleman come up to me. He was a big burly guy. He said, I used to whale. I said, okay, that's good. He said, I can tell you how we can kill that whale straight away. How are we going to do that? Well, you're going to get a fire extinguisher, a foam fire extinguisher, and you're going to fire it down the blowhole of that animal. That'll kill it. Uh-huh. Mr. Police Officer, the next day we came back, the whale had a third blowhole. Okay, someone overnight had come up to the animal and stabbed it with the blowhole, through the blowhole, on the assumption that because the blowhole is the mouth where the life comes from, right? That's how you kill the animal. You stab it in the blowhole. Of course, it didn't fail. It failed completely. The animal now had 3 breaths coming out instead. And in the end, they actually had caused much more harm than good. From that moment on, we had to have the Mounties guard the whale day and night, 24/7. Eventually, the whale got out, actually. What was the cost of that? Not that much money. It's really interesting when you get the local community to act as stewards for a problem, amazing things happen. Okay, and that's actually been a key to a lot of the work that I do. Try to find stewards who are invested, who have knowledge, who can help that situation. I also, when I was in Newfoundland, I was there in grad school for 10 years. I got very much involved in this business of whales getting tangled in fishing gear. You know, when I first came to Newfoundland, I came there because I was going to save the whales, because these damn fishermen were killing whales in their nets. The first time I got to go on a whale release, they stuck me in the fishing boat with the old patriarch of the family, who had no teeth and was probably 95 years old, and he was smoking up a storm. And I was trying to engage with this guy, and so I would say something in my very British English, and he would go back, "What?" Because Newfoundlanders have this really, really strong sort of Irish, Cornish accent, and they're very difficult to understand. Ask Davis, he knows from personal experience. And then he would say something back to me, and I would go, "What?" We couldn't communicate, and that became to me a really interesting metaphor about not just the physical act of communication, but also our cultures being so disparate. Here was me thinking this man was so evil because he was killing a whale. Here was he thinking, these whales are a bloody pest. They're ruining my net. That's $25,000 down the drain like that overnight. How am I going to recoup that kind of money? There's tons of humpbacks in the ocean. Why can't we just shoot it? Totally different value system. Not bad value, just different value. Okay, so how do we weigh those value systems? Which one is correct? Can there be one that is correct? This is how we free whales. We get in these little rubber boats with these little knives, and we cut them free. I can't tell you the number of times I've been tied up against the side of a whale, physically manhandling it with my hands, trying to cut a line off the thing. And I don't say that, you know, as sort of a heroic thing. I mean, it's incredibly, stupidly dangerous, right? But why do we do it? Because we don't like to see the suffering. How are we funded to do it? This is interesting. The local fisheries government agency had no interest in saving whales, but they did have interest in saving the nets because they recognized how expensive they were. So they funded the program to save the nets. We were the net rescue program. We managed to save the whale at the same time, which is what we wanted. But it was also about saving nets. Some of these entanglements are absolutely ghastly and horrible. You know, the line digs in and causes all these welts and bruises and abrasions. And eventually, in the case of this one animal here, his name is Churchill. He's a bit of a celebrity in whale world. The line cut so deep, like cheese wire into the skin grew over. All right, so that he would never be free of that line. And it all became infected and pussy and parasites and little lice crawling all over it. It must have hurt terribly, if indeed whales can feel pain. I think they can. And this is a very sad story because we put a sat tag on Churchill and we used to watch where he would go every day. And then all of a sudden, the signal went away. End of Churchill. Okay? This is an animal that is endangered. There's only 450 of them left on the planet. That's it. There's an American politician on record as saying, who cares if they all go? They're clearly on an evolutionary dead end. Right? Well, I care. That's a northern right whale. In fact, the whole subject of entanglement is one that really benefits from the human ecological lens. The book on the left here you see is by Tora Johnson, who is a former graduate student of mine, who sort of looked at that from a sort of ethnographic perspective, and she demonstrated very different value systems between Canadians, the way Canadians do things and the way Americans do things. And this is one way you can view it. Actually, Canadians, the summary of the book is that Canadians are much less hindered by the law, so there's a lot more ability for us to respond at a grassroots level, and the Newfoundland fishermen have really organized in a wonderful way to try and save these whales. But this is another face of it. So here, down the States, we value seals to the point that when they strand, we'll rehab them and pump them full of drugs and make them plump and happy little sausages, and then we set them free. And there's a classic case, well known in seal stranding world, where we got a letter from a Newfoundland fisherman returning the tag to us saying, thanks, that seal was delicious. Because they shoot seals. They hunt them. They're food. It's just like a fish. It's called the seal fishery. That's how they value these animals in that particular way. When I went to Newfoundland, the first question I asked was, okay, so where's your stranding program? What stranding program? Well, what happens if like a seal washes up on the beach? We eat it. What else will we do? Oh, the Americans, that's right, they saved these guys. Very different view. Not bad, not good, just different. This is Steve Katona, for those of you who don't know him. So he was co-author on that, Are Whales Ecologically Important? The summary of that paper, as far as I can tell, I don't know whether anyone else had a deeper reading of it than I did, but the summary of the paper is, they're not particularly ecologically important. If whales died tomorrow, I would be incredibly sad, and it would be a massive tragic loss in my mind. But ecologically, life, in the words of Jeff Goldblum, will go on. Right? It'll find a way. A different predator will replace it. This is the Andersonian point of view, right? We happen to live on a time on this planet when there's whales. There was a time on this planet when there weren't whales. There will be a time on this planet when there are no whales. There will be a time on this planet when there's no humans. Also, when you start thinking about ecosystems, which is a little bit of an evil word, because it implies an order to things that probably isn't there, we start thinking about things like food webs and how things interdepend upon each other. So if I was to throw that question at you, what happens if we take all the whales out of the world, you'd probably want a chart like this, right? And you go, well, okay, we're going to take out this organism here. What happens to the rest as a result of that? That is a cartoon explanation to try and help people understand the concept of food web. A food web looks more like this. Okay? If anyone tells you they understand the ocean, they are lying. We do not understand the ocean. The ocean is an incredibly dynamic place. It's constantly changing. It's kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. The minute you finish, it's time to start again. Okay? The minute you measure the ocean, it's different again. It's a very, very challenging business that we're in here. So how you understand what a whale's role is in that, I have no clue. What about the whale hunt? Okay, so we all know that in the 19th century there was this thing called the Great Whale Hunt, right? And we took out about 90% of the population of whales on this planet through that hunt. Most of that hunt happened down in the south, and this is a sort of generic graph that explains how that happened with some countries that are involved in that. Notice that during world wars, we're not so good at whaling. So world wars are good for whales. Not so good for humans. right? Actually, the period immediately after whaling, after war, is very bad for whales because all the technology that comes from the war then gets put onto the ships that then kills the animals. So you see these huge spikes here after the World Wars. In addition to the fact that a classic technique in war is to kill your food resources of the enemy country. So you have this desperate need to eat after a war. You know, famine is very common, hence the English World War II song, "Whale Meat Again." You guys don't get that, do you? Okay. Vera Lynn did a song called "Whale Meat Again," very nostalgic song, "Whale Meat Again." My dad remembers eating whale meat. Okay, he remembers taking a little ticket to the butcher and saying, "Okay, I'd like my ration for the week, please," and you get a slab of whale. This is a place called Grytviken on South Georgia. It is whale capital of the world. I've been there many, many times. It's like a ghost town now, obviously. You can still smell the whale. After hundreds of years, you can still smell the pungent smell of dead whale. And I've stood in this area here, and this is totally me putting this on. I know it is, but it feels like a real ghost town. Thousands of whales, millions of whales were cut up in this area here. We are still whaling, okay? In general, the world decided back in 1986 that we should stop whaling, but there's a couple of countries who said, no, we want to keep going on. Let's find ways to do that. And so there's a couple of clauses in the treaty that caused the moratorium. One of those clauses is the Aboriginals are still allowed to whale because it's part of their culture. And then another one is, if you want to do a scientific program that requires the collection of data that would mean the whale would have to die, then you can apply for a permit and will allow you to scientifically whale for a certain number of whales. This is what the Japanese are doing right now. They are scientific whaling. That's why on the side of this vessel here, they have the big word stamped research. In fact, if I was to pan out on that shot, you would see the words, "We are doing research," okay, to try and justify to the world what they're doing. I want you to make up your own opinion about whether or not the Japanese are truly scientific whaling or whether they're just using this as an excuse to continue to do what they always used to do. However, I should say that none of the science from any Japanese whale hunt has ever made it to a Western peer-reviewed journal. Ever. In fact, they had to invent their own journal to get it passed. So they do this for scientific purposes. If only it could be reversed. And there's been a couple of films in the press lately about attitudes towards whales. Who's seen The Cove? My entire marine mammal class got subjected to this just the other week. I made them watch The Cove and Blackfish together. And the only way I could get them to agree to do that was to buy like 5 tubs of ice cream to have alongside. Just to keep them happy. So The Cove, is this story about what's going on in Taiji. There's a fishing village in Japan where they herd dolphins together into a small cove. They take the ones that are really, really spunky and might be good for aquarium. They take those away, and then they kill everything else. And they do this in absolute secrecy. So The Cove is about the undercover story to try and actually film what's going on, document it, and show it to the people that this is going on. It's a very powerful documentary. It's actually, we have a link to it through COA. One of our trustees is the father of the guy who is the covert operations leader in that film. So if you want to meet him, we can arrange that. It's not an easy film to watch. It's actually, the actual thing was about, 5 minutes, do you think, guys? 5 minutes of actual horrible, horrible things. But it's not easy to watch. But it's mostly about trying to show how the Japanese are completely righteous about doing this. And the only thing I could think of as an equivalent is, Japanese feel the right to do this as much as you feel the right to vote. All right? It's ground into their being. It's a cultural right that we can do this. These are just fish. Okay? We don't treat them any differently to fish. This is a dolphin fishery. The film is mostly about this guy, Ric OBarry, fascinating guy. He was the trainer behind Flipper, which is an old American Australian TV series, right? Or was it American? American TV series. That's right, Whirlybirds was Australian. I was getting confused. Or Skippy, that's right, Skippy. Right. He was the trainer behind Flipper. Okay, and Flipper was actually 5 different animals. Depending on how Flipper was feeling of the day, they would use a different animal to substitute them in. They all look the same, right? They've all got that smile on their face. Evolution has painted the smile on the face of the dolphin. He has completely changed his mind. And at this point, he is dedicated to freeing every single captive dolphin he can find on this planet. And he's become essentially what some might call an eco-terrorist. He's not the worst, but he's certainly out there. He's one of the worst. Paul Watson. I've met him. Ask me about it someday. I've had people come up to me and say, Sean, what do you think about whale wars? Isn't that cool how they're doing all this stuff to stop the Japanese from whaling? And I just, in my opinion, Watson goes way too far, and he causes more damage than good. We could talk about that in question time if you'd like. However, in one of my more sagely wise moments, I'm not old enough and gray enough yet to say wise, sagey things, but I'm working on one. Here it is. I want to try this out on you guys for size. Ready? Without extremes, there can be no middle. Yeah? Right? So he's an extreme on one side. There's also an extreme on the other side. There's people like these guys. You know, and we are slowly morphing our heroes. You know, our heroes used to be, or still are, people like Darwin or Joseph Banks or, you know, some of these famous naturalists. Now, of course, it's all about TV and media. So, you know, some of these people are real scientists in their own right. Others are just really smart TV personalities that have got a really good way of putting ideas across on a medium that is now very, very common in all of our homes. Clément, I put this guy in for you. Who is he? David Suzuki, yeah, Canadian. We all know this. We all know this guy, right? This is David Attenborough. Love him. Of course, Jacques Cousteau and Sagan. Even Sagan. Love Sagan. I miss Sagan very much. He's one of my heroes. Then Blackfish, okay? It's a story about supposedly a SeaWorld cover-up that they had a whale that had already been demonstrated to be psychologically damaged, had already killed, and yet they continued to allow trainers to be exposed to this animal, and eventually the whale killed again, and then there was a massive inquiry into it, and this film was part of that. And it just takes a lot of time to talk to present what it believes to be the complete inhumanity. I love that word, like we're trying to apply a human standard to an animal situation. But the inhumanity of captivity. This is captivity in its most extreme. You know, and here's some sound bites of what people felt about that film. However, I mean, who's seen Blackfish? Yeah, quite a few more of you, right? A lot of people, have you noticed how SeaWorld declined to talk the entire time in that film? Do you know why? Because they got a massive gag order on them. They're in the middle of a court case, right? So they didn't decline to talk because it was like a no comment kind of thing. They declined to talk because they weren't allowed to talk. So the documentary is very biased. And, you know, I encourage you, life lesson, okay? When you go into these kinds of documentaries like The Cove, like Blackfish, think about who's telling the story, think about their biases, think about your biases that you're bringing into this, think about your positionality. Be honest and open about that, okay? Do the same thing when you're talking about values. Be open about your positionality. It's really important to recognize your filters that you bring to these kinds of experiences. There's a website out there now, I just love this, look, SeaWorld Cares. The truth about Blackfish. And they go line by line, shot by shot, and say, that's not true, okay? Are they right? Is Blackfish right? That's up to you to decide based on the evidence. Interestingly, Blackfish came out at a time that the Marine Mammal Society was just meeting in New Zealand, and we decided to talk about whether or not we needed to make a statement about the cruelty of captivity. And the conversation stalled pretty quickly because we started talking about the role of science in society, which is a fascinating question. What is the job of science in society? I might argue the job of science is to provide objective data. There are people in this room who would probably say that that's impossible, to be totally objective about a data point. But I think that's the principle of science, is to provide objective data. The minute I decide to use that data to advocate for a particular position, It could be argued I'm no longer being a scientist because I'm now trying to do something with those data. And this goes back to what Don was saying earlier on, right? Science doesn't tell you what to do. It just tells you about a particular situation and puts some degree of confidence around that knowledge. It's up to you to decide as a society what you choose to do with those data. So what about me? Because I keep bringing this back to an intensely personal experience. It's what you guys feel. It's what you guys bring in with your own context, your own experience. I think whales are really neat. And I think that's okay. I don't need to feel guilty about that. And you know, some people say whales are neat and then they go on to be very anthropomorphic about it. You don't need to be anthropomorphic about this. Whales are neat without being anthropomorphic. Let me show you this video. This is a minke whale that I encountered in my last Antarctic trip. Minke whales are typically very solitary, very scared and nervous animals. They don't come anywhere near humans. Look at this guy. He's looking at the camera. My camera has a big red life jacket on it, so it floats because I don't want to lose like a $500 camera. And so he's seeing the color red, and he's reacting to it. He's about 2 foot away from the camera at this point. Okay, notice how his eyes are bulged slightly forward. It's a bit of a myth that animals can only see out this way. They can also see forward a little bit too. I had a 20-minute encounter with this animal where he or she chose to come to my boat every single frickin' time. He would go away, and then he would come back, check me out again. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful encounter. Did I feel kinship? No, not really, but it was amazing to be that close to an animal, that powerful. Here's another example. I'm out with the first mate of the ship that I'm on, and he's looking down at the humpback. This humpback whale stopped, turned right, came over to our boat, and hung under our boat for about 15 minutes, just going. I can't explain it. As a behaviorist, as a scientist, can't explain it. You know? Maybe it was curious. Why can't it be curious? Why can't it just be pure curiosity? Anyone own a dog? Have you ever seen a dog be curious? Although, maybe we're being a little anthropomorphic. I don't know. It was such a glorious experience for me. After 15 minutes, I finally remembered, oh shit, the camera. And I actually put the camera down. And so when I did that, this will show you how close the animal actually was. You see I'm trembling, because it was just an incredible experience. And there he is. There's the eye, as Cousteau would say, the window into the soul. This is a gray whale. It's a calf. I was in Baja, and I went on one of these trips where there's a possibility that the whale might approach you. I saw a mother gray whale turn right, in other words, go a completely different direction from where she was going. She appeared to choose to come to me. Admittedly, this is my perception, and I acknowledge that. She then got underneath her calf and pushed the calf to the surface so that it was in much closer proximity to the people in the boat. And this is the calf looking at us. I can't explain it. I just can't, but it's at times like that when I just have to say, okay, well, science doesn't work to help me understand that moment. Sorry. Have to throw off that cape. Blue whales. We live at a time on this planet where we coexist with the largest ever organism to live on this planet. That's damn cool. 100 foot long. Awesome, inspiring creature. This is a right whale calf, a southern right whale, in the Peninsula of Valdez. Exactly the same situation. I'm in a boat, and the thing reorients and comes towards me and gives this amazing opportunity for a photograph. It's coming head on to me. It gets 2 feet from my boat, then dives underneath. And if you know right whales, they're not particularly dexterous. But somehow this animal totally avoided hitting my boat with its body. It knew where the boat was. There's experience like this that I fail to be able to interpret using science. Science completely fails me. They're just astonishingly aesthetic creatures. So, should we save the whales? In my opinion, hell yes. Why should we save the whales? Well, that's up to you. For me, I think it's a statement of being human. I'm a human. I'm a compassionate person, and I think that we overexploited these animals in a very unsustainable way, and I think we owe it to them for them to recover. That's my personal story. It might not be your story. That's up to you. Heath here might choose to eat them. That's okay, as long as he's got a justification for doing that. You wouldn't really eat them, would you? You might. Okay. It's 5:15, so I do have one last slide, but I'm not going to, it's a film. I'm not going to play it because it's by David Attenborough and it's the BBC, so perhaps we should avoid copyright laws by not showing it at all. But if you stick behind afterwards and if you have time and you don't mind about missing a little bit of supper, it's a 5-minute video that will show you really neat behavior. But why don't we stop here now and let's open up for questions.